Okay, well, here we are. Welcome, everyone, and welcome especially uh, Lama Pema Dragpa, who happens to be our most wonderful special guest today. As you've known, as many of you know already, we've been talking with several people that have done some work inspired by the Integral Vision, and Lee and I set up a page called Integral Resources on our website, which is practicalintegral.com. If you go there and you click on the Integral Resources tab, there are books and publications and courses and community gatherings and all kinds of stuff that's going on. Created by, written by, put together by, compiled by people who are, like I said, inspired by this integral, bigger thinking, meta perspectival view for the present, for the future, and an assessment of the history. So Dragpa happens to be one of them. So I'm delighted to introduce Lama Pema Dragpa, who is a resident Dharma teacher at Padma Samye Ling, the main monastery and retreat center of the Padmasambhava Buddhist Center, where he's been teaching since 2004. Ordained by the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche, Dragpa carries the living wisdom of the Nyingma Dzogchen lineage. Dragpa is the author of An Integral View of Tibetan Buddhism, Preserving Lineage Wisdom in the 21st Century. Here is a beautiful big book. It's a big one, Labor of Love. It's a beautiful exploration of how ancient Tibetan wisdom can speak powerfully to our modern world. Dragpa graduated from NYU, New York University, in philosophy and religious studies, and has edited over 20 books on Buddhist philosophy and meditation. Dragpa is also known for his brilliant insights on today's cultural and societal issues, bringing both humor and clarity to some of the deepest questions we face. It was also Dragpa's birthday this week. So happy birthday, Dragpa.
Thank you. Old age is coming.
Not quite yet for you. So it's a lovely delight, Dragpa. And I'm going to hand over to Lee to get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, so thanks, Namali. And Dragpa, one of the things we wanted to ask you to do is to basically take us through your journey. So what attracted you to Tibetan Buddhism as a person growing up in America, and what was your fascination and your motivation to enter into the lineage?
Oh, thanks, Lee. Thanks, Namali. Thanks, friends. Always, this is kind of for me like somewhat of a family gathering. So like really deep heart friends, and other people on the call. Like we've shared a lot over the years. So thanks so much for the opportunity. Like really genuinely. And I don't know. It goes back for me like middle school. I remember having a teacher around 6th grade, a language arts teacher who was really into veganism and honeybees and telekinesis, and I had the opportunity to write like a book report at that time, a 5-page book report on anything. And I chose vegetarianism. I was like, what? Why not check it out? So I did that. And this is 6th grade for me in USA, when I was like 13 or something like that. And right at the end of writing that 5-page thing, my computer crashed, which is just actually like a typewriter in those days, early 90s. So I had to do it all again. So then I kind of like really the impact of caring for beings of all kinds, like at that point really hit me. Like the logic of it, of like caring for beings who just want to be happy and not suffer, and different types of beings, humans and other beings too. And then also around that time, the idea of context started really getting very strong in my mind. Context, like everything's contextual. So that kind of really had a big impact on me at that time. And so somehow that lined up for me then. And then that started leading me a little bit to get into Buddhism and reading things. But I came across this Ken Wilber guy around 1999. So that's in high school. And I was just blown away by the level of intricacy and breadth of the different topics he was studying. Like now this is a high schooler. And that was introduced to me by a philosopher, like a high school teacher. And like I have a big debt of gratitude for him, Bill. And yeah, so then going into university, I went for philosophy, and I was really quick to kind of see that like you can be really, really good at thinking very clearly and brightly and analytically, and at the same time not really integrate it into your life much. I could just see that with I was around just amazing, brilliant IQ high people. And I thought for myself, like pragmatism, like making philosophy practical isn't just a choice, but I wanted to have that be like kind of a beating heart of what my life would do if that was possible. So that led me to meditation. And then another friend of mine helped put me on to this Goenka Vipassana tradition, which they offer these free 10-day courses. And I went on one, and that just really let me see how little control I had of my mind. It was just a bare bones, like put everything aside, don't read books, don't talk to people. All you got to do is follow your breath and your body sensations and stick with it, see the impermanent nature. And that was so hard for me to do at the time, and also so enriching and valuable. But it was a big lift just to be present in that way. And that got me into it, like a daily meditation sit. I was doing like at least an hour in the morning and an hour in the evening. And it became more of Buddhism as a way of life. Then I kind of opened up into the philosophy of Buddhism, which is extensive. There's like some 5 or so whole entire philosophical traditions the Buddha taught, as well as all these series of different kinds of meditations of how to embody that wisdom in an actual body in relationships in a more integrated way. So that's a bit kind of how I got into it. Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting. I didn't know that integral came first for you and then Buddhism later.
Yeah, it happened. It was kind of my fortune because then, I don't know, as I think probably all appreciate, Ken Wilber as one like kind of meta-integralist extraordinaire. Like he opened up so many doors for this kind of inquiry, for popularizing like this kind of awareness and locating that like as something that's real, meaning like it's a type of awareness we can be in and have access to and shape our relationships through and build societies and cultures around. And so that was lovely to see that so early for me in high school. And at that point, he already had so many books out, and I started kind of pouring through some of them. Yeah, especially I started Sex Ecology and Spirituality, and then after that, to condense it, Brief History of Everything with his his kind of dialogue, kind of structuring of that book was really user-friendly for me. At that age, it was super helpful. But like Wilbur's emphasized for so many years, like this, if this isn't in practice, if we're not actually transforming ourselves and not just translating with new ideas and new knowledge and new data, but actually some kind of embodied practice to actually transform how we're with relationships, how are we with the data or the knowledge, then it can very easily just be a bunch of head games, a bunch of smart people talking about interesting things, but in the end, it doesn't really affect their relationship. So if you ask people around them, it's like, how's this person? Like, oh, they're smart. And like all the other ways we can be, right? Kind and patient, forgiving, loving, resourceful, spontaneous, and those are qualities that really have to be lived in order to be grown, as Wilbur highlighted so clearly, as we've all kind of, I think, had the fortune to receive that highlight of practice has to be at the center of a truly meta-integrative approach.
Agreed. So, Namali.
Yeah, thank you. By the way, Dragpa, you might use certain Tibetan Buddhist or Buddhist language today. We might all touch on that sometimes, and maybe you can offer just a little brief description of some terminology for those for those of us who might not know that.
Thanks, Namaste.
Yeah. So I'm curious, as I was listening to your entry into this path, just a little bit of why Tibetan Buddhism also? Because there are different types of Buddhism. For example, I grew up in Sri Lanka in the Theravadan Buddhist tradition, and Theravada Buddhism in itself is also, expressed through the different stages of development, which makes it very different. I'm curious what in it for you was the draw into Tibetan Buddhism, or is it just because that's what you encountered first? And given that, your book, An Integral View of Tibetan Buddhism, explores how lineage wisdom can be preserved in the 21st century without being overly watered down to fit modern and postmodern trends, or the modern and the postmodern world. And you're dancing with the polarity there of sort of preserving and transforming. What does that look like in practice to honor integrity of an ancient tradition while speaking to today's world?
Yeah, thanks. So two lovely kind of streams of question there, like why Tibetan Buddhism for me, and then how does Tibetan Buddhism, like, how is it relevant or like open and conversant with like current things happening? How's it relevant? So the first part of like why Tibetan Buddhism, I found when I was doing the Goenka Vipassana. And I was doing that very kind of intently and seriously. It was about 3.5 years of daily sits. And on Saturdays, I would do 6-hour sessions. And my roommate at the time and I were hosting weekly sits. We had no intoxicants in the apartment. And we are just like in that tradition, they really have the metaphor of like, if you really want to find water, kind of pick your spot intelligently and then go deep there, and not like a bunch of wells here and there and kind of never go deep enough. So I was really trying to go deep in that one specific approach. And it's a Theravada approach, like Goenka Vipassana, and I'm so thankful for it. It still informs my life. I'm still so grateful for all that's happened there. But I found as I was doing the Goenka Vipassana more and more inside of myself, like somehow I was like, what about Tibetan Buddhism? At that time, I was going so deep in this one place, I really wasn't like surveying different authors or different approaches or teachers. So it was just kind of this like opening into that stream at that time for me. And at a certain point, I was like right at the end of graduating undergrad from NYU, and I had a good friend, Pelge, in a Tibetan Buddhist. He ran a Tibetan Buddhist shop in Soho, Manhattan. And I asked him, I was like, I'm looking for kind of a Tibetan Buddhist teacher. Like somehow, if I can't just only go deep in this one spot and not have surveyed some other things. And so he said, well, what do you know about, Dzogchen? I specifically asked for Dzogchen teachers. He's like, what do you know about Dzogchen? I mean, and I said, oh, well, there's this one book I've read, the Tibetan book of Living and Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. And he's like, oh yeah, really? How many times have you read that? Twice. So I did that one book. I really went into at this time. I was like, I got to just look at something, And he said, okay. And he was a good friend. He was just kind of straight up. Everyone wants the roof. No one wants to build the foundation. Everyone wants to say it's spontaneously free, non-dual, this and that. But everyone wants to skip the bedrock basics that actually make it inherent, like a coherent, reliable system. And so he was a good friend in that way. At the end of that conversation in his shop, he gave me a brochure for Padmasambhava Buddhist Center, the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche's, and he said, oh, here, call them. And he said, these are reliable Dzogchen masters, Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhist masters. And so I called them, and it happened to be a week later. They were leading their annual summer retreat up at Padma Samye Ling, upstate New York. And I asked, oh, can I serve, volunteer, cook in the kitchen, whatever? And I talked to one of the monks who's here now, Lama Laya, and he talked to Rinpoche's, and this, oh, come up. We come up and help and like come for the retreat. And so I did. And so like what really changed me, Namali, at that time is I came, I thought Buddhism was Burmese Buddhism. I came in a long gi. I thought the men were going to be on one side of the room, the women on another. There was going to be just silent, formless sitting. And so I get to the place and there's guys in shorts and like all the genders are all mixed up and they're doing all this chanting and ringing instruments. And it was just like, whoa, but I came with an open mind because at that point it was like, all right, I'm fully open. What is this? I want to give it a full, like an honest, like actual scientific, like what is this? Like genuinely. And so that was the first day. Second day was an empowerment, which, I had no clue what that was. Probably most people don't. And so the experience for me, and this is to your point of why Tibetan Buddhism hit, we're walking around the main temple here. It's early in the morning. I'm in my long gi and everyone's there's ringing bells inside of a shrine room and no one can go in. And all of a sudden the door opens and people start streaming inside. And I was like right at the end of the line. The door opens. I'm like, what's this going to be? And I come into the main hallway and there's all these painted murals everywhere, like beautifully. It took 5 years to paint. I mean, exquisite traditional Tibetan Buddhist art. And I come into the main hallway and I'm looking at one of the walls that has these guardian kings on it, these specific kind of protectors in Buddhism at the front of every Tibetan Buddhist temple. And I'm looking at the wall and all of a sudden the wall just like does this whoa, 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 whoa. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? And it was the wall of the shrine room. And so that like took me aback. And then I went in and they gave some blessed water and all these things. I had no clue what it was. And this is go through the empowerment. It's maybe 3 hours of this. And so it was just kind of all this new stuff. And then afterwards, basically it's like a picnic. We had a soak Gana Chakra offering. I don't know what that was. We all went outside, beautiful, sunny, bright blue skies, summertime, little kids running around, just totally idyllic. And then we're just hanging out. Rinpoches are there, seated outside, people just relaxing. And someone points up in the sky. And they're like, hey, look. And directly above the temple, like literally directly, was this double rainbow, 100% double rainbow sphere, like directly above the central spire of the temple. Everything else is just bright blue sky. And so at that point, I was like, okay, this isn't just some nice philosophy, like, oh, middle way, Madhyamaka, it has really nuanced philosophy. It's actually changing phenomenal reality that a bunch of people are simultaneously witnessing, and there's no drugs involved. Like actually reality's changing and we're experiencing it together. Like, so that gave me a really humble pause. Like, really, what is this? And so to answer a long-winded way to answer your question, Namali, is like here I met these two Tibetan masters and I thought, I didn't know them, but I'm 2 days in, right? And they're so nice and so sweet, and they can play with kids, and they can be with, like, I just could watch them, people ask questions. They could be with someone really upset and someone who just lost a loved one. And then they give these commanding, beautiful, mighty teachings, and then have these big ritual ceremonies. And I was answering at that time, like Theravada, like hardcore Theravada questions. Like, how does this fit with 12 links? How does this fit with impermanence? What about no self? And it was just, and they had an amazingly beautiful answer for everyone. And I was really impressed. So then at the end of that, and I'll wrap this up, I called my girlfriend at the time and I was like, honey, I think I got to stay for the second week of this retreat. And she was a serious Goenka meditator at the time. She knew, he's like, going to Vajrayana, which she wasn't against it. It was just another track, like another kind of Buddhism, like you said. And since then, like, I'm now, like a year later or so, I requested to be a monk at this place. And there's a whole big story and visionary things with how I got here and blah, blah. But really, so it kind of just came alive in me, the Tibetan Buddhist part. And like the philosophy was beautiful. And then that kind of sparked. But actually the living embodiment, there's actual non-dual wisdom shows up as deep kindness and flexibility and all this range of really high quality humanness that was really moving for me. So that's kind of how the Tibetan Buddhist part activated. And then in terms of for the 21st century, how's that relevant? I think this is really related to like any actual like meta-integrative approach has to be in a body. It has to be in relationships. It has to be in community. Like we build things in art pieces and like actual functional practical mechanisms together. Like, so that means like, it's not just abstract theorizing of meta modeling and like kind of where we kind of go have a 20,000 view of the things. That actually, when it comes to it, we actually have to like apply it in our lives. And that means like go deep somewhere or go deep in a few places, but going deep takes time. And so for me, Tibetan Buddhism, with my background in Ken Wilber, there's like so many ways that Wilber's offered these all qual buckets, all quadrants, all levels, all lines, all states, all types, all sometimes shadow, all polarity, like, and he has these buckets. And I could go through Tibetan Buddhism at that time and it was like, check, 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 check. Tibetan Buddhism like really was clear to me at that time and only become more clear. This is a lived meta-integrative system, one of hopefully very many. The more meta systems that are actually embodied in this world, like that's what our 21st century world needs. And the simple point is like meta-integrative awareness or integral awareness is like, it begins with, like Wilber said a million times, everyone has something valuable to offer. How does these different values connect together in a coherent way to create a more inclusive, comprehensive way of being in the world with others? And Tibetan Buddhism is one tradition that's actually instanced that for centuries. And I'm specifically looking at what the Buddha taught and not so much, we're humans. So humans create all the things together. And there's humans, we make mistakes, right? We're not 100% meta-integrative. Just like look at someone's psychograph, like, some of it's in teal and turquoise and a lot of it's in beige and red, like to use these spiral dynamics kind of terms. So for 21st century, the simple way that I've responded, like kind of really feel that is like Tibetan Buddhism really locks in this, what I see as like a hard fork. If we do meta-integrative without actually coming from a place that has deep care and concern for all beings, like I'm going to show up for all beings, at least aspirationally. So omni-win, win-win, game B, healthy integral, whatever you call it. Like it either can be a meta-integrative system that locks itself into that, it chooses to turn on that kind of way of being, or it just uses the meta-integrative approach to do more me first. I'm important, I'm special. So the warring mode of pre-integral world viewing. So there's a hard fork there. And I think without like intentionally, consciously, moment by moment, actually someone choosing to keep turning on and only having an omni-win approach, which in Buddhism calls bodhicitta, the heart mind of enlightenment, where like we're waking up for every single being. That's why I'm doing a practice. That's why I'm washing a dish. We keep coming back to this orientation and this worldview. And I thought that's like, that is the relevance of 21st century. Buddhism is an example of how one can do that. Just one example, and I hope there's tons more examples. Like we need that, like we need the diversity, unity and diversity. But without that bodhicitta turned on and chosen again and again, I think most meta-integrative projects are going to be more dangerous. You can just get easier to manipulate more parts, and there's like cascading system breaks and breakdowns more easily. And so I think that's like a key thing I see Buddhism really does well. Tibetan Buddhism, it always at the beginning of every study and practice turns on and tries to keep on this bodhicitta, heart mind of enlightenment. So you're only using the power of meta-integrative awareness for omni-win good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, really interesting, Dragpa. And so one of the things you said was the idea of finding a localized spot and drilling down and basically committing, at least that's my interpretation, committing to a path that is to a certain degree unwavering. So if I'm understanding you correctly, all of the egoic movement is constrained within a clear container. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I think I see it in terms of like any healthy system that sustains itself over time is always held within constraints. It always has boundaries because it's always bodies interacting, whether that's a biological culture or a community of humans. There's always some common page, some shared rules, shared patterns. It's like a game. If we're playing tennis, temporarily we have shared common rules that we agree to, and then that makes the game possible. It makes the culture coherent to itself. It doesn't mean it's the only game or the only way to make sense or the only way to make beauty and truth and goodness, but temporarily there has to be some kind of a common ground that we can do. And again, it's largely arbitrary, like the rules of tennis are arbitrary and the rules of soccer are arbitrary, or any language has rules, grammar, that are arbitrary. But to get good at any game, at any language, at any kind of line of intelligence, it seems to require certain constraints. And the trick is having the constraints be adaptive. And that's where all this complexity systems that gets into like places I haven't studied almost anything about, how to have constraints that are adaptive. And it gets into big philosophical questions about metaphysical givens and universal grammar rules and all that kind of stuff, or called meta heuristics, rules of thumb that work in many, many, many contexts. But it seems like a healthy system requires constraints. Without constraints or a shared room, like shared harmony, shared container, it's very easy to break trust. It's very easy to have that kind of disintegrate into kind of subgroups, or kind of, it's very easy to not have it's called a discerning permeable membrane. You need to know what to allow in and what to excrete or to remove. And that's all about healthy boundaries, right?
Agreed. And speaking about this diversity and unity, you're probably familiar with Richard Dawkins, who is, of course, one of the hardcore atheists of our time. And at the same time, he's recently been presenting himself as a cultural Christian and suggesting that in the meaning crisis, many people are looking for precisely, I think, what you're describing, these paths where you can connect within a container of meaning and commit to higher ideals or deeper values, or however you want to frame it. So in your work, as you describe the lineage of Tibetan Buddhism, how do you see the potential distance for people, for instance, in the United States, who've grown up within at least an implicitly Christian culture? How do you see the distance potentially between their home base and Tibetan Buddhism, or is Tibetan Buddhism closer due to particular reasons that you've experienced?
It depends on the person. Which means it depends on their background, language, talents, traumas, exposure, constraints, responsibilities. And so that's all culturally and societally embedded. We are culturally, societally embedded beings, right? So again, Wilbur is just like, that's part of the quadrant. And so to put it simply, the question for me is how to not be a fundamentalist, how to not be a fundamentalist Buddhist, how to not be a fundamentalist Christian, how to not be a fundamentalist atheist. And like, to bring it back to a previous point, we always have to remember, like, any approach is kind of like a game. Once we start assuming that that approach is somehow natural law or true in all cases for all situations, all contexts, usually that starts to mean we're like in some kind of fundamentalism. We're assuming too much. And so as a Buddhist, like, there's core like Buddhist philosophy called middle way approach, or the Madhyamaka approach, that's like assumed in the kind of a beating heart of Tibetan Buddhism. And it's also like the philosophical kind of framing of bodhicitta, of this integrative heart mind of enlightenment. Like, in that approach, this middle way approach assumes on the relative level, there is no fixed final system or set. It's all just internested games or views. Like, everything can break down into parts. Everything like changes over time. And so this is like just another way to talk about interdependence or dependent arising. Buddha called it pratitit samutpada. And if we as Buddhists take that seriously, it means Buddhism in the end has to dissolve itself. And the question is when to do that dissolving. And so they say, the Buddha Maitreya said, in the end of a path, even Buddhism as a set of practices has to undo itself, because that's just one limited way of framing or of being in the world with others. And so the thing is we need to use the certain frames, so the ecologies, the cultures we're a part of, that actually to awaken our own like heart mind of enlightenment, or our bodhicitta. Buddhism calls it Buddha nature, or Tathagata Garbha, this essential intrinsic goodness and intelligence that's like the actual way every single awareness functions before it locks itself into fundamentalism. So it says at the very bedrock of Buddhism, that has to be there in order for it to follow the teachings of the Buddha, according to this middle way view of Buddhism, which means it has to necessarily be non-fundamentalist if we're following in the footsteps of the Buddha, which is to say, like, in a lived experience, what does that mean? Like, what does bodhicitta mean? Or what is it like actually to have wisdom and compassion in a lived experience? If someone's really taking that seriously as a living practice or a way of being, that means what we do is like get in a context with others, like this Zoom room. And then we like try as much as we can to tune into the field of what are the living dynamics, who's here, what's landing, what's not, what are time constraints, where am I coming from, how's my mood. We try to track as much as we can the cosmic address, the like actual perspectives that are overlapping to make a single seemingly shared reality. And then we turn on bodhicitta as we attune, we turn on bodhicitta and like, I'm going to shape myself according to what the situation is asking of me, according to like how much I can flexibly do that in a healthy way. So bodhicitta always shapes according to the lived container or the context it's a part of. And that's how it like prevents being a fundamentalism when we do that. Like, that just means the game that's afoot is actually living and I'm a part of it now. So an actual bodhisattva, or someone courageous for the enlightenment of all beings, is kind of always playing this kind of chameleon role, which Wilber kind of adjacently referred to as universal donor, like this meta-integrative move of trying to see what's valuable in the context and like kind of how you can cohere them in a way. But you try to do it in a healthy way, meaning it helps them, it helps you, and it recognizes like there's more to include. Like, it's an endless moving system of systems of systems of systems, right? And then that way it like stays alive and in touch, and also humble. It says like, what am I available for right now? And how can I meet someone where like I'm tracking to some degree what they're available for? And so in terms of Christianity or any other approach, Richard Dawkins, like the atheists or agnostics or neo-Christian, or like, the question isn't to have for me, the question isn't to have a final meta set. It's not trying to have the post-integral final framing. Like, in terms of in terms of integral, that kind of thing doesn't exist. Like, Wilbur was really clear on that. There's no final box or no final frame. And so to give up the tendency of wanting there to be a final totalizing system is actually how integral avoids its own flat landing. It's actually how integral, whether it's Wilberian or Greg Enriquez or Jason Storm or, the Zach Stein, like, there's so many meta-integrative systems systems now kind of on the buffet table, like we have to keep remembering to not create a next meta level totalizing system. And that's like, I would call that healthy integral or mature integral. And after that becomes like actually creating culture based on that approach. So Tibetan Buddhism just kind of has histories of trying to create that culture, internal to like its orientation with its worldview. But so then come across Christians or any other non-Buddhists, the Buddhist thing to do is be like attune, shapeshift according to like what's available on any participant's side, and know that the intelligence of the people in the system, of the other beings, of the system itself, has autopoietic or self-regulating intelligence because it has this nature, this Buddha nature. So the Bodhisattva thing is to shapeshift in, support with as much nutrition as possible according to what is nutritious in that context, and then let go. Because the system itself will turn on, its own wisdom and compassion will turn on. And that's how it avoids being another fundamentalist system. Not trying to import something into some other context. It's just trying to love it as much and carefully with discernment as you can, and then let it go. Like the internal wisdom and compassion of every system and every being will, when it's, if meta-integrative is true, if integral is true, that integrative impulse will start to feed through all the connections of that system. And we don't need to do that. That's just reality happening.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And for everyone who's interested in what you're describing, an acquaintance of an Himalayan mind called Thomas Muddle, he's written a piece for Nature in which he describes what he calls the inner de-reification index, and basically a measure of the ability that we experience in meditation to see impermanence in everything. So basically to not reify, to not make things. As Alfred North Whitehead would say, the fallacy of misplaced concreteness. So to realize that things are basically, as you're describing, Dragpa, are dynamic energy, as Longchenpa would say in the Buddhist tradition. So
it's hard to do, right, Lee?
It is. I would say it's the challenge of existence. Yeah, absolutely.
What
So
about you?
please.
How are you with like releasing, concretizing, reification?
Well, I mean, that is personally, that is always the challenge, because as you say, the constraints are necessary for functioning, because if the self has no structure to itself, then it dissipates and you can't function in the world. So that's basically psychosis, basically. And so you need some degree of structure, but you also need to relativize the structure from time to time to see that the presumption of being a stable self is a concept. So yeah, I think this is an ongoing practice for me, and I think for all of us continually. So
Yeah.
Thanks for asking.
It's a hard one. And even just to stay put in a spot nowadays, like 21st century is speeding up, right? All these things are cross-pollinating with such a fury. The communication, the transportation, the knowledge sets, throw in some AI, like the whirlwind of of just things integrating is it's more and more apparent to more people, right? So like just actually staying put and like being a wind gauge, like that itself is going to make your system have to like show up and respond. Like you're going to at least see the challenge or the invitation of letting go, and also of holding with integrity, right? Like of rooting with what you yourself have experienced as being a deep, valuable goodness or intelligence or kindness or beauty, to stay rooted, but to not stay so rooted that the wind comes and you crack. So it's like how to be tenderhearted, but not heartbroken. How to like actually keep grieving, because the pace of change and loss, like this is a standard Buddhist thing, but it's a standard human thing. Like loss is a part of this thing that we're fragilely apart. To be a human, to love. I mean, you're going to have your heart ripped out. It's just, that's kind of how it is. And like, so how to like let that change, or this like more and more kind of fury of interdependence, how to let that soften you, but not so soft that you're a squishy kind of anything goes person in that, because it doesn't have any coherence, like you said, Lee, but also not to hold so tightly that then the wind of change is experienced as a threat and we become too coddled and we experience any difference as a challenge, like actually a threatening challenge, and we lock and reify and tighten and contract more. So it's that elegant, golden kind of this Goldilocks position, just exactly what you're alluding to, like to have structure, but it has to be flexible when that's appropriate. But yeah, de-reifying.
I'm just taking in all of your words like little pearls to my ears, Dragpa. It's yeah, absolutely. It's beautiful. It's drawing me to some of the other questions that Lee and I had wanted to run by you, of course. So I'll just kind of jump right into that. You're kind of alluding to touching base on sort of how to navigate these times of the meta crisis, as kind of a buzzword we often hear. And this kind of the beautiful dance that you're doing of marrying your Tibetan Buddhist path and the meta theoretical big picture views that you're holding, and the view of the Buddhist path as well, that is important in practice. But related to this, I caught a little bit of one of your writings recently around AI and human flourishing. So you drew a fascinating parallel between aligning AI with human flourishing and aligning ourselves with bodhicitta, the heart, the awakened heart mind. Could you say more about how this inner alignment might guide our collective relationship with the emerging technologies, exponential emerging technologies?
Yeah, it's a big question, Amala. Yeah. I find more and more go local is more and more relevant. So the Buddhist challenge is it's difficult enough to align myself with kindness and wisdom, because like if it's not a theism, like Buddhism isn't theistic, so we're not just relying on some external entity to do it for us. Like we actually have to have the free will choice to keep choosing to be wise and compassionate until that becomes so deeply embedded in us that we can relax and just let the natural systems of inclusion and kind of comprehensiveness and integration we're basically become this like fount of like meta integrative plurality or unity and diversity. So like that's the path in Buddhism. But it's a hard thing to do. And that's when we choose it. And so that's already hard pre-AI anything. Like just for humans to keep choosing to be wise and compassionate when we're around actually demanding situations that like we could easily react to and just start a war, start a fight, call names. Like it's easy to go into a pre-integral approach, isn't it? I mean, it's very easy, especially when something is pushing at our edges of our growth edges or just tender spots or our shadow spots where we haven't like become very aware of. And so that's just to say, choosing the integrative or meta-integrative move is always been hard until we get really like habituated to it, and then it becomes a natural thing we do. So then to throw in AI, then like that's its own thing. Basically, we're trying to do a third person, quantifiable, empirical, rational design of systems, of these AI systems that are more and more autonomous agents. And people are trying to engineer them in order to, up level any game. Like it can be a so-called tool or like this agentic, self-referential, self-retraining tool that can very easily do things on its own and actually create more data on its own. And so we don't know where that's going to go. That's obviously a big question mark that anyone in the field of AI is going to, if they're humble and honest about it, they don't know how this is going to turn out. Like there may be some specific use cases with very narrow designed AI where AI can just help you pay your bills or something. But once you are trying to train for general intelligence or an AI system that can do a lot of different problem solving types, just like a human could be at a Zoom call, drink a cup of coffee, like recite some poetry, like we're auto-poetically like syncing up with these different lines of our own intelligence. Like they're aiming to have they meaning the people who have the billions of dollars to actually get the GPUs to create these AI systems. It's a handful of people, not like everyone doing this. So, but those people, we'll see. Like it's an engineering feat, right? Like whether The problem is, in Wilberian terms, is largely this is a third-person quantitative problem so far. How do you design a system with third-person logic or language or actual in like quantifiable system parts? They're not talking about subjective culture building or meaning making or kind of like semantics because we don't know how to design that. And those people don't usually believe that actually mind comes first. They usually believe mind is an epiphenomena. If you design a system with the mechanics, then somehow consciousness spontaneously turns on. So that's a worldview. And in Wilberian sense, that like only honors half of the quadrants, right? The objective third person halves, and maybe the interior ones somehow pop on magically. But Buddhism doesn't agree to that. Awareness is always there, and it always expresses itself relationally, externally, as body, or what can be seen as like relative, and that can be like more and more metrically quantifiable. So it's I don't know, it's a challenge, Namali. Like, that's why I say I go local. Like, one, I don't have the money to make decisions about what these AI companies do, like, you know, who's designing Claude or Grok or ChatGPT 5 or all of them. They keep going. And more, like 10 years from now, it will be more like anyone with a laptop can actually have the power to create new versions of these with the exponential rate of technology and the decrease of cost in doing it. So that just makes the problem more challenging. There's going to be a lot more types of AI agents out there and suites of them and who has access to them. It's all a very big, complex problem. The Buddhist challenge is still there. How can I show up with bodhicitta on in my relationships, the close ones, the meso intermediate ones, the macro cosmically big and capital K cosmocentric big inclusive framings or boxes or connections of relationships? How can I really, on a ground level, turn bodhicitta on and then like interface with and be with others in a loving, like responsive way? AI, the healthy versions will help empower us to do that more, or show us when we're biased in like unhealthy ways, or they show us, you know, how to be more meta integratively like filled out. The healthy AI agents I'm sure they can design that, like even the integral life one. Like I'm sure that's what it's designed for, to make us more meta integratively healthy. But the problem is like most of it's going to be junk food AI. Just like most of it's junk food TV and most of it's junk food social media and most of it's, you know, and there's junk food and then there's heroin. And most of what we're seeing, like these, you know, billionaire plus people put out is pretty much heroin currently, because like that creates the best consumer. Like you put heroin on the market, you get everyone addicted to it. You like have them trained to be outraged all the time and they'll keep clicking and keep, you know, engaging. And so currently the landscape is like basically ratcheted up to be the most toxic one if we don't choose to go deep in a spot locally. If we just let Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and all these people, they have Buddha nature too, but the incentive for them to maximally augment their power to be world level rulers, it's called a Chakravartin in Buddhism, someone who rules the world. And then someone who rules multiple planets. That's currently on the table. I want to be the first multiple planet ruler. Like that, like pretty much currently creating heroin for the masses, and like they don't, like legally they're not showing up to pay for any of the horrors that are happening or to bind or intentionally constrain their AI programs to actually be more healthy and wholesome for the larger range of users of AI. We can see that like with Facebook, for example, like all of a sudden, like there was like Frances Haugen, who was a famous Facebook whistleblower, like in response to her, you know, saying, hey, Facebook can make a lot of this a lot healthier with a few sticky tweaks. It's not some big, they don't have to change all their coding. They just have to like include a double click here and there, or you have to copy and paste something. And Facebook refused to make those small sticky challenges that would drastically reduce the fake news that streamed through and was shared through that platform of Meta, but they didn't. And what they did in response, this is a few years ago, is they actually gutted their research team. So instead of being legally liable for having in the future know about the different harms that were being created when Facebook was deployed throughout the world in all these countries, they wouldn't be legally liable because they never did the R&D, because they didn't pay for the research. And so like that is not that for me, that just means like there's a few people that can use heroin well as a medicine, but most people can't. And like, that's a question for each of us. Like, where do I use technologies that are very baby beginnings of technologies? And like, how do I use them with my personally, like, how do I bind myself to use or not use parts of them? How do I like encourage or like be with other people I care for closely to like make similar decisions, or at least have an active conversation around the kind of harms that potentially can come with this kind of technology?
Yeah, beautiful, Dragpa. I want to just double click a little bit on when you said, around inner alignment, when you kind of wrote in your little blog that I read recently around um, aligning emerging technologies, or specifically you said AI, with human flourishing, and how to do that inner alignment around guiding our collective relationship with emerging technologies. Something I heard you say was, I go local. Could you just tell a little bit more about, like, practically, what does that mean? Like, what do you actually personally do when you say I go local?
Yeah, cool. It's a whole range of things, and a lot of them are like more and more kind of known. Like, have specific times that you would use your phone, like have phone detox times, like certain days you wouldn't use like certain tech. You could add grayscale filtering to your phone, like they usually come with it, where it makes it less kind of like vividly catchy. Um, you can like set up just so that's like one avenue of tech, which seems to be the main one for most people, like our smartphone usage. Um, Here we're a meditation center, so like more and more Buddhist meditation centers are like having people like basically check their phones in at the door. And to come with like, unifunctional watches and unifunctional flashlights. Like basically we're taking it back, 20, 30 years to how we were before we had these like supercomputers in our pockets. And this is not a Luddite move. This is just a recognition of like, this is crack in a very small thing that I can use, and I can think like I'm the most healthy user of my smartphone that's ever existed. But when they survey people, everyone thinks that. Kind of a funny thing. And so that's like these self decisions to like have time off. Like now they call it nature bathing. It used to be called taking a walk in the woods. Go park. Or like sit on the grass every now and then. Or like, have like actual person to person, face to face, like in addition to 2D conversations like this. It's amazing to have such a wealth of knowledge and community shared, like, but also to have the 3D, 4D embodied personal relationships, and to like carve out time for that, and to like make it more of a priority. Like even if that's one person, or just showing up, like sometimes just make it a phone call instead of a Zoom call, like where you can just like really tune into like a smaller range of like something that you're connecting through, and like make that specific range more vivid and more high quality. Like, but that's, so there's a lot of different tips, and like this is all just meta integrative stuff, right? This is not some big Buddhist kind of insight. This is like, how do we more integrally, like in the healthier aspects of healthy pre-modern, healthy modern, healthy postmodern, healthy integral, or post-postmodern, like how do I choose in these different aspects of my being, this stacked spiral isness that is this seemingly self-sense me? How do I care, like actually care for like safety and like belonging, and actually being active, like self, like agent in the world, like with creative decisions? And like how do I actually open to like the plurality or the flourishing of multiple perspectives and like kind of contextualization? This is all like just healthy pre-modern, modern, postmodern, post-postmodern. Like this is what like any meta-integrative model, especially the Wilberian one I know a little bit, is asking us to do, just to get up to like a basic healthy meta-integrative or integral level. And in addition to that, like, so that's the techniques of body health, mind health. It's like basic hygienes, and those can be fun. It doesn't just have to be like flossing your teeth. You can like make exercise fun. Like you can be in team sports, and you could, have healthier food choices for your own body, like according to what helps you. Or you can have some meditative practice of various types of kind, or you could get exposed to different kinds of knowledge that's out in the world. There's so much knowledge. So like step outside, bubble hop a bit, right, Namali? Like put yourself in some other container that, hey, if you don't really like all the engineering talk, well, watch 2 hours of engineering talk every now and then, just to like have less of a like knee-jerk reaction against it. Like, because there's a lot of beauty in that approach too. So I think there's like a wealth of very practical, simple tips. And all this is about like discerning like choice. actually choosing to hold yourself accountable so you can be more embodied and responsible in the ways that you want to be. Like, this is where the meta-integrative thing is really important, to not go fundamentalist. It's not, this is what everyone has to do. It's not everyone has to have this exercise regime and these kinds of foods and to use a phone or don't. It's not that. It's just saying, in my local context, like, what are the shared agreements that I can like basically have and test out, at least, for a day, a week, a month, with the people that I'm, like a partner or kids or like a community. Like, can we agree to some simple kind of same page in order to create, one, this good faith dynamic so we can have trust as human challenge comes up, and two, like, so we can actually like have some kind of a shared space, so when the actual difference or the diversity, the different things come at us like they do, it's called a news feed and it's called bills and it's called all the life stuff, then we'll have enough of like kind of coherent like ecology. I like to think of it more as an ecology, so that then we'll like be more like adaptively responsive and like actually made a integrative response, as opposed to just one part of our like spiraled state showing up and kind of reacting. So it'll like increase the likelihood. Going local increases the likelihood, in my experience, of actually showing up in an integral way. Otherwise, it's so easy to talk big picture, big everything and all that, and the Zoom call ends, and then boom, you just kind of do your own like rote thing.
I don't
And
know.
so, yeah, Dragpa's back. So before we hand it over to audience questions, I very briefly, Dragpa, want to share something for everyone, including you, that an acquaintance of mine is working on, and it's called the International AI Governance. Let me see if I can share this so people can see. International AI Governance Alliance, and it's basically an urgent call for global AI governance. So there's a petition he's created. His name is James Norris. And so lend your voice in shaping a future where transformative AI is only created if it can be done so safely and fairly in service of all sentient beings. So I'll share the link in the chat. And if anyone wants to check that out, then they can.
I mean, this great teacher, Dzogchen Khenpo Rinpoche, he's not as hopeful for us to like deal with these meta crises in a way. One, because samsara, we've always had these risings and fallings, and a world system gets a golden age and then it breaks into a degenerate one. Like, these cycles are big and cosmic, and it gets together in a good coherent way, and then it disintegrates. We happen to be at like a degenerate age where it's like basically defined as like the 10 non-virtues: killing, stealing, lying, like, like taking advantage of like sexual relationships, being basically always intoxicated. These are like all normalized now in our culture. So that's called a degenerate age, where like the least virtuous response in terms of healthy balance internally and externally is the norm. So like collectively, we're encouraged to kind of do these kinds of things. So given that, it's like in a trough, like it's a golden age and triple age, then double, then degenerate, and then it goes back up to double, triple, golden. And it's in our universe cycle, the Buddha taught there's going to be 18 times this goes down and up. We're in one of the downs, degenerate age, and they said the Buddha came at that time because it's best suited for Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhists, when things are most triggering. That's actually when the most karma, or the most kind of locked in reifying habits, can be released most quickly. And you get as more benefit of bodhicitta on very brightly when it's less when it's more dysregulated like around us. But it's hard because we have to actually have that through line to be able to have bodhicitta on, and like the supportive systems or a path that would make that a living reality. But this Dzogchen Khenpo Rinpoche, he says, we can't even get together and like have a worldwide like no one drink Coca-Cola for a day. I mean, if we all could organize that big, like we could have a ton of power, but to get that many fish in all these schools of fish swimming simultaneously in ways that have that up-leveled bodhicitta, this omni-win, it's hard to pull it off. It's hard to pull it off in a family, let alone a town, let alone a city or a state or a country or a world. I'm all for the aspiration to have like AI come out as like bodhicitta aligned, like to actually have a moratorium. I know these different people are calling for at least a pause on AI so that we can just slow down and do this more intelligently. But then we have the standard Daniel Schmachtenberger multipolar trap thing where everyone's racing to make the worst version of it because we're assuming the competitor is already racing, and so we need to get there first. So everyone's racing to make the worst kind of heroin AI possible. So they'll use that weapon against the others first. And at the global level, like that's why for Buddhists, it's more aspirational. You keep the local context as healthy and integrative as you can, and you keep the aspirational view, like to completely have healthy meta-integrative bodhicitta aligned as vastly as meta.
Dragpa, we're losing your.
Vast as
I don't know if it's just me. Is everybody else
No,
having?
no, I'm also seeing Dragpa freeze
and the
up.
power line aspiration.
Dragpa, you're
Oh,
breaking
sorry.
up a lot, Dragpa. You're
Bummer.
breaking up a lot. Are
I
you,
can move.
what do you think, Lee? Should we have a little
It's
bit
only been going on over the last 10 minutes that you've been breaking up, so I don't know if anything's changed. But
Oh, you get a little temple tour. I'm
Yes.
gonna walk down.
oh, excellent.
Yeah, there we
This is the
go.
library.
Yeah.
This is where we're having this Mipam Institute. It's a 3-year Tibetan Buddhist language training
Wow.
and philosophy. So that started last month. Oh, you get the little tour
Yes. This is delightful.
downstairs.
Take us with you, Dragpa.
And as we're being led round, anyone who's on the call who would like to ask Dragpa any questions, please raise your electronic hand, and then we'll.
Yes, let's open it up.
And if you don't want to be on the camera with a question, then just put something in the chat, and we can ask on your behalf.
Oh
this
my
is-
goodness.
The hallway
nice.
that like did its matrix wave for me early in the beginning.
Wow. Wow.
So I'll just do a peek into the main shrine room. This is modeled after the Samye, the first Tibetan Buddhist monastery in Tibet. It's literally the same way that Samye monastery is designed. So it's like as if we're going into Samye. That's Padma Samye Ling.
Mm.
Very nice.
People are practicing in there. Yeah.
The main shrine room. And I'm gonna tuck into a little corner room here. It's just closer to the router, so hopefully this will be a little better.
Okay.
Thanks for
In the
your
meantime-
patience, everybody.
Thank you.
meantime, I'll
That was
bring
delightful.
Beth on.
So we'll see if I'm still here.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
Perfect.
And we have Beth who's going to ask you a question.
Yes.
Hi. But you were talking about fundamentalism in Buddhism. And it made me think about this ultimate concern, this sort of infinite altruism that, historically has characterized Buddhism, but without the knowledge of things like states and stages and the distinction between those, or pre-trans fallacy and all of that. So what sort of kept Buddhism from being, somehow contaminated without that knowledge, just as an example of the difference between states and stages?
Yeah, lovely. Such a profound question, Beth. I mean, really, it's a deep one. In my very small understanding of Buddhism, and it is really small. I've been at this place for 20 plus years, but the experts of Buddhism who've really integrated this in their lives, like my teachers, Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche, and I mean, there's a whole hundreds of years of lineage masters that have demonstrated with their activities in this life, like how far and how deep you can go in all of these lines of development. So I have a tiny little peak, a very tiny little peak, and I'm just principally like a student. I'm definitely just learning Buddhism and, drop by drop, kind of opening up to its beauty and kind of its liberative impulse, the enlightenment of all beings. So in my tiny little inkling, the Buddha really did teach a lot about states, obviously, like a waking state, dreaming state, deep dream state, the non-duality that kind of circulates through all those states. And we can see that he did because there's practices that the Buddha instructed for each of those types of states. There's actual trainings you can do when you're in a dream, for example. There's a robust system of that. So at least Buddha was tracking states. And then in terms of stages, almost most Buddhist approaches, when they're talked about gradually, we're gradually kind of taking a path to enlightenment, they do it in a stage model. So from more egocentric to more us-centric or sociocentric to more world-centric, like all humans, to more cosmocentric, capital C, like humans and non-humans, to more cosmocentric, capital K, like all beings and manifest reality, inside, outside, in between. The Buddha taught in this way, in a stage model way. In Buddhism, it's called yana, or vehicle. In my tradition, like the one I'm following, is the Nyingma school. That's when Buddhism first went to India from Guru Rinpoche, or he took it in the 8th century-ish. He took the full teachings of Buddha into Tibet, and then that lasted for about 200-300 years, and then was almost eradicated in Tibet. And then it didn't successfully fully extinguish Buddhism there. But then there was a second wave that came after that from India, Buddhism into Tibet. And so in retrospect, they call that first wave the new school. Or sorry, the first wave was called the old school, and the second wave was called the new school. And so in my, what I'm following, mainly the old school, the Nyingma, it really has this 9-tier system or layer level system, going from egocentric to more bodhisattva altruistic, to then includes tantra, then includes Dzogchen. So in Dzogchen, they call it great completion or great perfection, which means it includes all of the sublayers. It's not just the top of the mountain and everything's non-dual. It's actually the great completion means the basic view, meditation, conduct, and fruition or result of each of the different kinds of yanas or vehicles, the worldviews you can take as a practicing human. And so great completion means includes all of them, which for my view is more why it's another example of why it's just so obviously a meta-integrative model. And so how has this been done in a way that's with some key, more 20th century insights in terms of psychology or empirical science? How has Buddhism kept this track? I mean, and not become, a fundamentalist religion? I think I keep going back to, Beth, that it really has this bodhicitta at the heart of it. Bodhicitta, this wisdom and compassion. So you're constantly trying to show up with what's alive in such and such context, which means for a bodhisattva who's actually trying to live that, it means nothing is off the table for your education. You want to actively learn about as many languages as possible, as many skill sets as possible, because they enable you to have a bigger toolkit, if you can say it that way, so that you can better show up in this case with this person. If someone likes it to be slow and paced, loud and frantic, they want it more first person language, more third person language. They want to look more at this kind of a knowledge or that kind of a knowledge. An actual bodhisattva is trying to learn it all, so that you can actually shapeshift through those relational structures to be an attuned best fit for a given context. And then, like I said, let go and let the context inform itself. Because if you support something to be nourished, its own inherent potential starts to line up and just shine more brightly. It seems to be what happens with systems, whether they're humans or ecologies of any kind. So I don't know, how has Buddhism done that? It gets into a lot of nitty-gritty historical details, but there's also been these movements throughout the Tibetan Buddhist history that any time it's any approach tries to lock into only this way of doing Buddhism, there's been these movements or responses to again come back to the basic bedrock teachings of Buddha Shakyamuni and not get fundamentalist. There's many approaches of how beings can be enlightened. And there's many Buddhist approaches, and there's also many non-Buddhist approaches, I would hope. But I'm not an expert in any of it, but especially the non-Buddhist approaches. That's why I'm very hopeful and encouraging that this meta-integrative approach or integral is getting more and more public acknowledgement, so that people can auto-tune their own systems of method. But the Buddhist thing is it always, one of the things it did, and then I'll conclude that, is it always aligns towards enlightenment or liberation. So it's not just trying to make a better world. It's trying to make the best world possible. And the larger vision of Buddhism is so that we can completely wake up and no longer falsely concretize or reify in a mistaken, locked way. So basically it's saying we can keep the meta-integrative impulse alive. And so all of Buddhism is trying to align that. And in the 1700s and 1800s, there was called a non-sectarian movement, or Rime, which then was this flourishing of a very healthy meta-integrative impulse to be there's so many ways to do liberation. but they all have to be rooted in a coherent internal system. So you get a new school way, an old school way, all these different lineages, and they go back to the root of bodhicitta, but then they flourish on their own terms according to their own game. And then if you do that deep enough and you actually get liberative insight and wisdom, you'll start to be able to do it in other systems too. So you could like play this game, play that game without mixing the rules up. So it maintains this coherent localization, but then you also develop these other skills to like be in someone else's system according to what's helpful, and you don't mix up the streams. So that's at least the ideal. And Buddhism is really again and again come back to re-emphasize that healthy, what I would call a healthy integral impulse, which is why I see it as an example of that being instanced for centuries now in the world, our world.
Yeah.
Was there anything else you wanted to add, Beth?
Well, just, I was thinking about the absence of sort of formal shadow work, historically in Buddhism. And yet I realized something like Dzogchen is just looking at your mind is shadow work.
It is. And like one thing that I think is really given Buddhism a significant, orientation is that this idea, it starts as an idea that every being has bodhicitta or has this heart mind of enlightenment, this Buddha nature. This is not a Buddhist thing. That's just a Buddhist term for it. It's called Sugata Garbha or Tathagata Garbha. And so the worldview starts with, I have Buddha nature. It's perfect and pure and utterly complete. It's not a question of getting it or fixing it or purifying it. It's there is the natural way my mind and heart are every single instant, regardless of what happens to me and what I choose to do. So that's the bedrock worldview in Mahayana Buddhism. So that means you have Buddha nature and she does and they do in every single being, the ants and the aliens and myself too. And as a cosmological orientation, meaning on this planet and other planets and all the beings, Buddhism has as a fundamental orienting framework. Every single awareness has this innate intelligence and goodness. And so that kind of a framing really helps oneself to not like take, as a culture, like to not like be super obsessed with shame, guilt, putting up with crappy things from your boss because like what else are you going to do? Like it basically says like it's such a high level of like win-win orientation cosmologically, literally as the story making we're a part of. And I think that's gone a long way for Mahayana Buddhism to like, if they didn't have certainly like a lot of these formal like mechanisms of shadow work, like actually as a story that they're a part of, the fact that everyone is literally enlightened awareness, and the question is just having that awareness know itself better. That's a very different framing, which really helps prevent a lot of toxic self-hate and like other harm as well.
Thank you.
Just on that terminology, Tibetan Buddhist or Buddhist terminology question, Beth's question just reminded me, I know we had just invited others to bring on your questions, but I just want to quickly add this maybe for a brief commentary from you, Dragpa. Speaking of the Bodhisattva that you brought up, could you briefly describe a little bit about, especially for those who are not from the Buddhist path, what is really the Bodhisattva? Because I think a lot of people might have heard that the Bodhisattva returns and returns and returns until all the Buddhist path in some ways, or the Bodhisattva path in some ways, is that I am not a Buddha until all beings are Buddhas or all beings are liberated. So what does it actually mean to be a Bodhisattva, and how would you describe this sense of returning until all beings are liberated?
Hey, so deep. So in Buddhism, there's two, and I'll keep it brief because I don't do that well. So there's two liberations in Buddhism: self-liberation and other liberation. Self-liberation is basically renouncing selfishness, self-centeredness, self-absorption, all the tendencies to always put myself as the center of everything, and everyone's a secondary character in my story. So self-liberation is when we relax and eventually release that tendency, where we're actually just one like important, unique, contributing part of a vast, limitless field of interdependent others. So that's the self-liberation part, where we really dislodge or just relax and release that tendency to always centralize into this me. And we do that through like methodical practice. Like we have this felt sense of me and like try to find it and try to really pinpoint that. And like we come to, as we apply these techniques, we come to see like it's just a habit I have to always center myself. And we see, oh, I can't find it. I can't find it where is it in my body? What color does it have? Like there's all these very systematic ways that we inquire into this, who am I, or what is awareness? What is mind? And again, that not finding actually makes us more functional individuals. So like we release the like having to only be one way, and then we can be more of a plurality of ways, more of a relational field, and these aggregates interacting. There's all this technical stuff there, but the self-liberation part is we're easing up on our own boxing of ourselves. And then that naturally extends into easing up on boxing others. You're just this, you're just that. Like basically we're trying to have meta-integrative me-ness and meta-integrative you-ness and they-ness and us-ness and all of us-ness. And that's basically where other liberation comes in. Like a bodhisattva is trying to really give someone else the space and the relational integrity and dynamic plurality to more dynamically be amazingly the way they are. And so the bodhisattva, so once we actually start to see in terms of continuing, what is continuing, like from one life to another or from one moment to another, like when we really try to locate an exact thing that's continuing through time, we start to more and more have the visceral, actual direct experience of like, there isn't a thing that's continuing through time. They're like feeling like an irreducible me and an irreducible unit of space and an irreducible unit of time. Like these things start to relax and ease up too. And so like that, I mean, that's easy to say, but there's a lot of study that happens and a lot of practice or embodied, like embedded, like isness or beingness to really loosen that up, that locking mechanism that's actually fixating or fundamentalizing, like to really see that I'm doing that, release, see that I'm doing it, release, ease up. And actually what we find is like much more mature, fully functional, meta-integrative, like beingness, or that's called bodhicitta, kind of starts moving through us like as a relational isness. And so it does this honoring self and other. You can be like free and fully yourself. I can be free and fully myself. And because we're integrative, when it's healthy, we're going to mutually boost each other. Like because you're trying to be less selfish, I'm trying to be less selfish, so we can be like actual omni-win or in this together. It's called like a dream team. It's all a dream. How do I make it the best dream for all the dream beings? And the dream never ends. So the dream will continue. And that's like in Buddhism, if we look back, like take a bigger step out from life to life, life to life to life, it'll just, this dream keeps going. And so Soksar Khenpo Rinpoche again, he says like to put the Bodhisattva path distinctly in a simple way, it says, there is no finish line. There is no finish line. This will never end. And if we take it back, it never began. And so how do I deal with that much connection, that much relational connection? Is like we have to be in the relational field and actually see its dreamlike or its kind of naturally ever-changing quality too. So there's always these two parts that a bodhisattva, one courageous for the enlightenment or the liberation of all beings, they're always toggling these two aspects of reality. The relational field is inexhaustible and infinite. And the actual nature of each of those relationships cannot be boxed in any way without distorting its fullness. So it's literally absolutely unboxable, unfindable, cannot fit into any kind of a framing or a set system. And so these two aspects, basically it can't be mapped in any final way. It's no totalizing system can do it. And it's this infinitely robust set of relationships at every layer of the stack. Anywhere we look, these two aspects of relative and absolute truth are like kind of bread and butter of a bodhisattva impulse, not just as a way to talk nicely on a Zoom call, but literally you get in the field of beings who've really gotten stable with this impulse, like this way of being, this bodhicitta, and like they totally auto-tune to a situation and they're just utterly refreshing to be around. Mm-hmm. And that can feel like very uplifting and encouraging. And it also can, like a mirror, it shows us our beauty, our inherent Buddha nature goodness. It also shows us the ways we're blocking that. So there's always, we have these good things. And like, if we tweak this one thing we keep doing, like more of our goodness will shine out. Like these great masters who have that degree of stability in their bodhicitta as bodhisattvas, they really help kind of like accelerate this process.
This is the real turquoise practice you're describing, Dragpa. It's really beautiful. And it's also sort of you're talking about what we often hear about turtles all the way up, turtles all the way down. Yeah, infinitely. Mary, go ahead, Mary.
So thank you so much, Dragpa. And I'm just feeling very tender as I listen to you go on and on. So that earlier statement you made about that at some point it dissolves. At some point Buddhism dissolves, which everything, I guess, would dissolve. But then it goes on and on and on. It never stops. So he was just like living with that. And like, I guess on a very like relative level, things dissolve. And so like just like knowing when to dissolve, when to keep going on and on. And there's really no answer, but I just really, I just feel you, I'm feeling this dwelling with that as you speak on and thank you for it.
Yay. It's a big thing, Mary, right? To show up and to let go, to love and to lose. I mean, it's just a tender thing and an empowering thing. Because when we show up, like it actually can be of service. It actually can greatly help. Like when we show up for ourselves or we show up for each other, it's just, we're going to have to show up tomorrow too. And then the next day, the dream really continues. And so it's like, how do we like hold the richness of actually the demand or the responsibility to keep showing up, but to not take it so seriously that if it goes sideways, we don't break or we don't give up or we don't dissolve something preemptively. So we all need some kind of a path. That's the challenge of that kind of Buddha said is like without a path or like some kind of way to systematically kind of open and deepen, it's really hard to do a well-rounded opening liberation process. And so we can talk about the non-dual stuff, like say there's no goal because it's already present and the nature of mind is already perfectly like here. But the problem is if we lose that recognition and then we're not seeing that, instantly we create the need for a path. So I'm not in it. So now how do I get back into it? And that's called a path. And so we actually are the ones that keep creating the need for the path. It's just how sentient mind is. Like if I don't feel my enlightened awareness now, like then the question is, how do I get there? What do I do? And if we're in that mode, a gradual mode, we need steps that are reliable for ourselves. And that's like the inquiry for each person. Like what path serves you? What supportive structures help you? And it can change with life cycles, with seasons, with moods, with different challenges and demands that we're facing. Like that path, that's why it's a difficult process to keep being meta-integrative. We have to keep flexing to have a path that has coherence, that keeps working for us. Otherwise, why would Buddhism have so many skillful means? Like oftentimes, like, if sitting like in a good posture helps for a little bit, sometimes it can get super flat and dull. So we learn a moving posture, or we learn we like to just meditate too much. So now we need to like study some. Like it has these, what Vervaeke calls these counteractive dynamical systems. So like healthy ecologies have these ways that they keep the different elements of themselves in check internally. So it doesn't require some outside entity to do it for it and enforce. But internally, it has these self-regulating checks and balances. So a healthy lineage would always have that. And that would create like the opportunity for a healthy path, which would always be like an ecology of practices, like ecologies that are actually checking themselves to stay adaptive and fresh and like updated with what's helpful now. So the simple way to say what is the Bodhisattva path is what serves, what helps right now. And we keep trying to like genuinely like root into that question. And because life changes, what serves now is going to be different than what serves like a day from now. And then we kind of find a path that helps us like stay on course, but is adaptive enough that like lets us keep showing up in a way that freshly connects with now, but like has to do it coherently, like unto itself. So it's a tender thing. I'm with you on the tenderness aspect of that.
It's great to be with you, Dragpa. I just love your teaching, and it's wonderful to feel it and to take in what I'm able to. Thank you. The question I have is when we are fully present and we're fully part of a group or part of an activity or part of a person, I get that there's something very new that's going to occur every second, and it's probably going to be positive. But what I'm wondering is, can you talk a little bit more about that? What's the verb? What is transmitting during when it's working so well in present moment? Why is that so? Why is it uplifting? Why does it create something good?
Awesome, Wheaton. Yeah, we both commonly know like the different ups that Ken Wilber has like kind of made popular and famous. They're these very quick self-check mechanisms like waking up, showing up, growing up, cleaning up. And these are like different ways that we can really zoom in to like very important aspects of a situation really quickly and like turn the light bulb on and do a self-system check. So in addition to these ups, waking up, which is more liberative, showing up, which is more like the fullness of ourself turning on, cleaning up, which is like doing shadow work and making ourselves more conscious to ourselves and in healthy relationships, growing up, which is to deepen and open the sense of me and you and us and all beings and all manifest reality. We keep enfolding more. So in addition to these ups, I would definitely advocate for us syncing up, or just like uplift. I mean, that's just like one more kind of like little kind of cute way of phrasing it. But in Buddhism, this is where a lot of devotion comes in, especially in Tibetan Buddhism, but all Buddhism has devotion. And it's always defined as this warm-hearted closeness connection with reality happening. And that can be reality in myself, reality in the relationships that I'm a part of more intimately, more locally, in extended relationships, and also the reality or like kind of the relationship shared with beings that are really rooted in that kind of like syncing up mode, like of being all qual full, of like fully alive, fully on as much as they can, and then to open up, show up, grow up, clean up, sync up more and more. And so it's this warm-hearted, close connection to reality, not so much to a person or a relationship, but just the fullness of reality that like shows up as persons and relationships and worlds and buildings and all this stuff. Like, so what syncing up does is the whole thing is like, if we go outside, we don't have to actually design the outside. It's already an internal system or an ecology that has its ways of being more healthy unto itself. And every system that's like standing the test of time does that. Our mind does that. Other beings do that. They're these ecologies that have their internal intelligence, and when they're aligned more supportively to themselves, they flourish. And so what devotion does is it tries to recognize there's certain ways of being to have this bodhicitta on, like this love and compassion on. And there's certain beings that have it on almost all the time, or all the time. And they're actually creating webs of connections and literal in Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism worlds. They're called Pure Lands. Like they've actually been co-creating these whole systems of relationships, these relational fields. And the question for me, which is like why Guru Yoga or a practice is so fast, it's one of the reasons why Vajrayana is considered a swift path, is it's less of a question of like, how do we figure out and get out of the meta crisis? It's more a system of connecting with beings that have already done these like very intricate, large scale world system buildings, like bodhicitta expressed over very long periods of time and body. And we sync up with the intelligence of those fields. And it doesn't mean that all of a sudden, like we automatically know all that, but we become a part of, as much as we connect to it, we become a part of their relational field. And it kind of helps us auto-tune to these own capacities we have to actually like really in an embodied, embedded way, to literally course bodhicitta throughout all the spiral stack that is the embodied sense of me. And so it's just this quick way to do it. Like if we, instead of trying to design, just third-person engineer a system, we try to actually sync up with beings and places that are already really harmonized. And it does this mutual uplift effect, at least temporarily. And then we start to get good at how can I sync up with things that have this mutual uplift benefit? And how do I discern to not sync up with certain things that have a mutual contractive, really kind of warring mode, like how to not sync up with those two. So it has this dual purpose. But what is moving through, to your question? I mean, Buddha just called it Buddha nature. I mean, and that's just at a very outer Mahayana level. Like in Tibetan Buddhism, they called it, this is like a Rigpa, or like self-knowing, pristine, valid cognition. It's this wisdom mind. It's often just called ordinary mind. And it's just this way of being that every moment, like there is this wisdom awareness on. And then it's like basically the expressive power is so much that we get this slight sense of fear, and we like lock in and push away from the fullness of it. And there comes like our duality framing, and we start holding on in this reified way of what's the comfortable box that I consider myself and the world and how things go. And that happens every single moment continuously. The good news is like there's this wisdom awareness that's always happening. And so like if we can tune into that, it's not a checking out. It's the wisdom awareness like gets brightly on, and then it always relationally expresses. That's literally creates a world with others in the world. And so this is where Tantra, like Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism comes in. We try to recognize the wisdom awareness first, and then expressively create pure, like sync up with pure others, pure sound systems, and pure kind of awareness happening. It's called pure body, pure speech, pure mind. And because there's already these fields in play of pure body, pure speech, pure mind, or basically called wisdom awareness, then all of a sudden it's not a question of having to design it, but how to expressively, relationally be it in the kind of crystallized, on the spot way right now, depending on what the context is that we're a part of. So hopefully that answers some part of your question, Wheaton.
It does, Dragpa. Thank you. I'll chew and be aware of that. Thank you.
Yeah,
Have
that's
good chewing.
wonderful.
I have one other question, actually, one other question that I'll pose real quickly, and then we'll bring it to a close. We spoke about the Bodhisattva path and about this kind of return, and keep returning. What is, at this point in time, what is of utmost concern to you? In other words, what is something that'll keep you wanting to return?
How amazing beings are. I mean, just the more I look, like the more it's just so much to love in beings. Like it's so easy. Like I sometimes think of myself as like an integral cheerleader. It's so easy to like find things to love about other people and other beings. Like it doesn't have to just be humans. Like there's just so much beauty there, and so much like kind of intelligence. And if like, I mean, I found again and again, if I genuinely like kind of tried my best to show up in a situation and ask like a real question to someone, like what's meaningful to you? Like what do you love? Like what stirs you? What moves you, And I really take the time to like listen, like really receive the response as fully as I can. I mean, it's just amazing how much everyone's already a genius. They're already just like such gorgeous, beautiful beings. Like, and that's like really, I mean, you can put that in any kind of language clothing of Buddha nature or kind of inherent wisdom or whatever it's called. Like when I find that I really take the time and root and just like really allow myself to like genuinely open-heartedly try to connect and be with someone and not expect it to be a certain way, and like really show up and listen and care for, like really receive what they offer, like again and again, I'm totally blown away by like how amazing people are. And it's gotten so much so that it's like much more of a default mode of just like, oh, you're amazing. And I can just like do a checklist of like how many, like a tiny little peek into someone's life, like easy to make a big list of how amazing they are. That's why the acknowledgments in the back of my big old fat book is like, I don't know, 6 pages long, because there's so much to love in beings. And I know, Namali, you so much to love in you. Like there's, as like an integral trailblazer yourself, like really putting the blood, sweat, and tears into like bringing Wilberian Integral into like the forefront, like as available as it can. And Lee, you've been like showing up to these Enneagram calls and offering like kind of free kind of integral life kind of classes and courses for like, how many years were you all doing that? And like, and this is decades in the making that you all have been pouring into this. Like, I'm so thankful for it. Like, I think this is really bedrock stuff, that this meta integrative modeling, putting it in like common sense, colloquial ways that are actually rooted in different kinds of sciences, but that are as easy to access as possible. And then for people to like live it, like to be together and try to really live it and put on some flesh and bones and like really do the hard work of loving together and grieving together. Like you all have been doing that. I have a ton of thanks for you for that. And like, I'm really like happy to be on the Forever Dream Team with you all and with so many others I've come across. Like, it's a beautiful thing we're a part of. And like when I get low and when like trouble and things come up and I'm like not happy with what seems to be happening in parts of the world and certain responses and power players, like actually showing up locally with people that are like close and I can ask them a sincere question and listen to the answer like again and again. I'm like totally in awe of how much people actually show up with and like how amazing they are. That's really what keeps me coming back.
Beautiful. And you are a dream, Dragpa. Thank you for gracing this earth. We are all alive to be somehow traveling, journeying with you, and people like you. So just such an honor to be with you today, Dragpa, and what a beautiful way to close. And I think that I want to invite you, Dragpa, to close this call with perhaps a blessing from your tradition, however way you want to offer that, and perhaps a little English translation of it to close this call.
Lovely. Thanks again, Namali. Thanks again, Lee. Thanks again, everyone on the call, those who'll connect with it later. Always, Buddhism has these three frames: noble beginning, noble middle, noble end. So the beginning is the motivation. Genuinely turn on the brightness of your lived experience as much as you can, as fully healthy, integral as you can. I've been trying to do that in this call. Always we try to begin there. Begin in the most all-qual full way you can. Buddha nature, bodhicitta, whatever you call it. The main practice, the noble middle, is always really like being that and like having relational structure to that, like really kind of like creating a world and dissolving the world. And like that's what creation stage, completion stage is in Vajrayana. We create a world that we want to be in that's beautiful and nourishing. And in the end, we have to let it go and it dissolves. And then the third part, the noble conclusion, is always we dedicate the merit and make aspiration prayers. So we take any good, virtuous, healthy, uplifting, positive habit or energy that came from the result of that activity, and we intentionally dedicate it for the happiness and enlightenment of every single being. May they all be free of suffering and the causes of suffering. May they all have happiness and the causes of happiness. So here I'll just like say this one little bodhicitta prayer called 4 Boundless Prayers, and then maybe we pause for 10 seconds of silence. And then I'll just quickly dedicate the merit in English with 4 lines. So this prayer is, and we just like kind of really take in the meaning, and this is like a practice people have done to become full Buddhas, you know. May all beings have happiness and the cause of happiness. May all beings be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May all beings never be separated from supreme happiness, which is without suffering. May all beings remain in boundless equanimity, free from both attachment to close ones and rejection of others. It's like be in these 4 boundless, infinite love, infinite compassion, infinite rejoicing, infinite equanimity for 10 seconds. We dedicate by this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy, wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it, may it be generated. And those who have it, may it never diminish, but always continue increasing. Deity, mantra, and dharmakaya are the nature of appearance, sound, and awareness. The pervasive kaya and wisdom display of the Buddhas. May practitioners of the profound and secret great perfection remain inseparable from the innermost one taste awareness of wisdom mind.
And as we say in Sri Lanka, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Love you all.
Love you so much, and love to
Thanks
all
so
of
much,
you.
Dragpa.
Thank you, everyone. Maybe you can unmute yourself and offer your voice as we leave. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dragpa.
Thank you.
Wow, Lee.
Thank you, Dragpa. Wonderful.
Thanks, Namali and Lee. Thank you, Dragpa.
Bless
Great to
you.
be with you.
Take care.
Bye.